All right, rolling. Hi there, and thank you so much for clicking on this video. So this video is part of a little series that I'm doing where I'm trying to conceptualize a Pokemon game that I would really like to play in the future. So I don't know if I will make this game or if a game developer and other creatives would like to collaborate with me to make this game, or if the Pokemon Company and Game Freak happen to stumble across this video and decide to either buy out my ideas or hire me as a writer. I don't know. But in any case, this has been fun. This has honestly been the dorkiest thing that I've gotten myself into this past month, but it brings me a lot of joy. It brings me a lot of joy knowing that I can just go on camera, share my ideas, and that some of you seem to like them as well. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you for indulging in this little universe that I'm trying to create. So without further ado, let's get started. Actually, before you watch this video, I highly recommend that you watch my game concept video first. That way you'll be able to understand the main story beats and the context of the universe that I'm trying to build here. But if you're feeling a little bit lazy, here is a very short premise. In the game, you do not have parents, and your main objective is to figure out who they are and what happened to them. And due to some awesome legendary Pokemon super magic, you are given that opportunity to solve that mystery. You are given the opportunity to travel back and forth between the past and the present, and even meet younger versions of your parents. At the same time, you are also trying to figure out the mystery of the legendary Pokemon of this game. And spoiler alert, the legendary Pokemon of this game are actually your parents reincarnated. All right, now that that's out of the way, let's talk about what this video is actually about. The characters, but more specifically, the side characters. So these past few weeks, I've just been cooking up characters left and right, and I've been having so much fun with them, and I got so excited that I was like, you know what? I think I'll just make a video about them. I think they're pretty cool, and I hope that you think that they're cool too. So today I want to talk about 4 of these characters. Number 1 is Heyi, who is the psychic type trainer. Number 2 is Ukai, who is the flying type trainer. And number 3 and 4 are weizhe and longwei, who are brothers, and they are dragon type trainers. So let's start with Heyi's character, because he's probably gonna be one of the first characters you'll meet in the game. So in the beginning, you traverse into the woods and you find a very mysterious shrine. And that mysterious shrine is actually tied to the legendary Pokemon of the game. And you guessed it, thanks to some awesome legendary Pokemon magic, you get transported back to the past. And when you wake up in the past, you're lying in the tall grasses, completely vulnerable to the wilderness. And suddenly, a wild Pokemon appears and tries to attack you. But before things get ugly, Heyi arrives and he stops that Pokemon. And that is your introduction to him. So after he wards off the wild Pokemon, he gets a better look at you, and he can't shake off the feeling that he's seen you, or that he knows you somehow. And the reason being is because Heyi comes from a long lineage of psychic type trainers. And these trainers have functioned as mystics in the region. So your boy basically a shrine maiden. One of the things that he inherited from his family were heightened psychic abilities. And his ability specifically is the ability to have visions or dreams of the future. And you have been in a vision, or perhaps many. He even cites that the reason why he came to the woods that day was because he had a hunch. He basically had a vision. And who was in the woods that day? You. Heyi is pretty funny though, because he is pretty skeptical of these visions. He's not really sure how much credibility he should pour into these visions that he has. And I think the reason why he's like that is because in this moment in the timeline, things are starting to modernize, and people don't really see the relevance in Heyi's family anymore. They don't really see the value of tradition, and they don't really see how these things have a place in modern society. All right, so at this point in the game, you are not doing so hot, and it's just the beginning. So you just got plopped in the past, in the tall grasses, almost died at the hands of a wild Pokemon, and you were barely conscious. And Heyi sees that, and he's like, whoa, you were barely conscious. So he takes you back to his family shrine, where he can nurse you back until you are fully conscious. And once you are, boy, you get a shit ton of lore dumped on you. So Heyi's family is pretty important in a lot of different ways. So one of those ways is that they are preservers of stories and traditions of the region, and they preserve them orally. So ever since Heyi was young, he learned everything there needed to know about the region orally from his elders and seniors. So this actually sets him up to be a pretty helpful resource in the game, because if anyone knows anything, it's probably gonna be Heyi. Another thing about his family is that they used to be guardians of these two items in the game called heirlooms. And these heirlooms are directly tied to the legendary Pokemon. Soren, the legendary Pokemon of Order, and Zaylin, the legendary Pokemon of Chaos. So the heirlooms, they come in the form of pearls. So we have Soren's pearl and we have Zaylin's pearl. And I thought that this was kind of clever, but maybe it's a little cheesy. But I thought it would be cool if these pearls functioned as ancient forms of Pokeball. And in these pearls holds the divine power of these legendary Pokemon. And when you activate them, the divine powers manifest in the physical embodiments of those Pokemon. We do have a problem though. Heyi's family has not owned those pearls for a very long time. And the reason being is because they were shattered a long time ago. But Heyi does tell you that they still have one fragment of Soren's pearl. And that's the only proof that these items ever existed in the world, as of now. So if you want to learn more about this lore, you can go to my game concept video because it's a little bit dense. For the sake of this video, all you need to know is that Soren and Zaylin decided to take these fragments and scatter them between this past timeline that we're in and the present timeline that we're from. And the reason being is because they wanted to trust the fragments to people that they felt very close to during their human lives. And who were they as humans? Your parents. So you learn later that Heyi is a friend of one of your parents. And maybe part of this whole entire venture is basically meeting your parents' friends and learning a little bit about them throughout your journey through the eyes of their friends. I think Heyi has a pretty interesting character arc. I see him as someone that really values and honors tradition, and he really wants to preserve what his family has been doing for generations. But at the same time, he is a young man caught in the modernization movement, and he wants to be part of it. So his life work revolves around trying to take the traditions that his family has worked so hard to preserve and use them to propel society forward into the future. So in the present timeline, he is the headmaster of the region's Pokemon Academy. He has dedicated his life to preserving the region's history and traditions, but unlike his family, who has passed it down orally, he has decided to transcribe all of the histories in writing so that his students can have access to all of these stories. So I think that is his way of propelling everyone forward while still preserving what his family does. I also think Heyi is a great character for the beginner tutorial parts of the game because one, he explains a lot of the lore very early on, but then he also kind of is set up to be the perfect person to give you your first Pokemon. So perhaps before you go into the past timeline, you meet him in the present timeline and he gives you your starter Pokemon. And don't be mad, but I think your starter Pokemon should be an Eevee. And the reason why has to do with some story beats later on in the game, but also I think Eevee is a really cool starter Pokemon to have. There's so much potential in an Eevee. Eevees can be anything. All right, hold up. Totally forgot. We need to talk about his Pokemon team and his Pokemon strategy. So I think it'll be really cool if you get to fight him twice. Once as a gym leader, and then the second time when he is headmaster of the academy. So in the past timeline, when he is a gym leader, I think he should mostly have baby Pokemon. So more on the lower level side, because it's the first gym leader. So his team will comprise of an Esper, a Munna, an Abra, a Ralts, a Meditite, and a Chimecho. I feel like thematically all those things align with Heyi. And after you win the gym battle, I forgot to mention this, you do win the fragment that he possesses. He basically deems you worthy of having it after you beat him. All right, so present day Heyi. He should have the evolved forms of those Pokemon. He should have a Meowstic, a Musharna, an Alakazam, a Gardevoir, a Medicham, and hear me out, replace Chimecho with a Celebi. I feel like thematically, Celebi would be great for him. So his battle strategy is mostly centered on patience and foresight. And he focuses on setting up defensive layers, moves like Reflect, Light Screen, and Yawn, because, you know, dreams and visions of the future and yada, yada, yada. So I think he has a protective nature, so him having defense layers makes sense to me. He wants to protect and preserve the traditions and the histories of the region. But at the same time, I feel like he would be like a protective older brother. And not to mention, he is the person that first protected you in the game. So shortly after you leave Heyi's city, you're gonna run into the next character. And I think the next character might be Ukai. So Ukai is a flying type specialist who also has an affinity towards water types. When you meet him in the past timeline, he is an aspiring professor that has dedicated his life to studying the migration patterns of Pokemon as well as weather patterns. When you meet him out in the blue in the Pokemon world, you find him a bit frustrated at something. And what he's been frustrated at is the current migration patterns of that year. Pokemon have been acting very strangely, the weather has also been kind of whack, and you have a feeling that it might be related to the time traveling stuff. It might be related to the legendary Pokemon. So you later learn that his research in migration is going to be pretty essential in trying to unlock one of the areas in the game. But the problem is that past Ukai has not finished his research, but present day Ukai most definitely did. So you travel back into the present timeline in order to meet Ukai and request the completed migration research. There are a few steps in acquiring this. The first one has to do with Ukai's ulterior motive, his reason for studying weather patterns and Pokemon migration. So on paper, it seems like he's doing, some really amazing research that's going to really add on to blah, 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 and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. But really, he's trying to track down a certain Pokemon. So this is a Spirited Away reference, so bear with me. When he was a child, he was swept away by the sea, and he nearly almost drowned, but then was saved by a mysterious creature. And that creature is Lugia. So eventually, he's going to have a Lugia. So the first time that he sees Lugia, you actually aid him in trying to find this Pokemon. But that time, he didn't really catch Lugia or anything. It was really just kind of like a reunion. Maybe later in life, he catches Lugia or whatever, but in this moment, he is just stunned and dazzled by what just happened. So he wasn't really sure if what he saw was real or not, but then a feather that came from Lugia appeared. And he decides to gift you this feather as a token of your new friendship with him and as a way of saying thank you. So you carry this feather for God knows how long. But it becomes pretty handy because when you meet Ukai in the present, he doesn't quite believe that you are you. It's been maybe 20 years, and it doesn't make sense that his friend from 20 years ago looks exactly the same. So he's doing some mental acrobatics. He is a man of logic, but that's also his flaw sometimes. Sometimes he needs to balance logic and instinct. So you decide to present him Lugia's feather as proof that you are you. He sees it and he becomes further convinced, but he decides that he needs to challenge you to a gym battle to really know if you are actually you. So once you win the gym battle, you get the migration research, but you also get a fragment from him as well. And he doesn't know exactly why he has it or why he's giving it to you, other than it probably just feels right. So you later learn that Ukai is a really close friend of one of your parents as well. All right, so let's talk about his Pokemon team. So in the past, before he becomes gym leader, I think he should have a Murkrow, a Cramorant, a Corvisquire, a Swablu, a Mantike, and hear me out, I think he should also have an Emolga for a few reasons. One, I think that's good type coverage. And number two, I imagine him having a close relationship with the electric type gym leader, which I will get into probably in another video. And I think it'll be cool if he had a Pokemon that referenced that character. For the present day timeline, when he is the gym leader, I think he should have, you guessed it, a Lugia, a Corviknight, an Altaria, hear me out on this one, a Dragonite, I'll explain later, a Gyarados, and a Honchkrow. So I don't know if this team works necessarily. All I know is that it kind of works thematically in my brain. So let's talk about his battle strategy. So Ukai's battle style is not about overwhelming force. He's all about control and adaptation. And like a seasoned researcher predicting shifts in climates and Pokemon behavior, he approaches battle with that same analytical mind. And on top of that, he's all about manipulating weather conditions and forcing opponents to be in a disadvantageous position. And I think that showcases his intelligence. He's always one step ahead, adjusting his strategy like the mad scientist that he is. So he'll probably try to outmaneuver you with things like tailwind and rain dance, for example. So a fun fact about ukai is that ukai is actually a traditional Japanese fishing method that uses trained cormorants to catch river fish. And guess what he has in his party? A cramorant. So I thought this would be a really cool theme because, as I mentioned before, he is a flying type gym leader, but he is a flying type gym leader with an affinity towards water, an affinity towards the weather and migration and everything. So, hence, ukai. All right, so after we get the completed research, we now are able to unlock a whole new area. And that area is Tenrai Mountain. But more specifically, the place that Tenrai Mountain is trying to conceal and protect, which is the crater beyond time. And that leads us to our next two characters, who are weizhe and longwei tenrai. Oh my god. I am so excited to share these two characters. I've been obsessed with them. So weizhe and longwei come from a very legendary, but also very terrifying lineage of dragon-type trainers. Their family, the Tenrai clan, have held a dragon sanctuary on the mountain for generations upon generations. So I affectionately call these characters my mountain bumpkins. And it's because they are so far removed from the modern world. They have just been secluded on the mountain for a majority of their lives. And I think that does something to you, no? So for example, they initially didn't have Pokédexes. Instead, they had thick-ass journals where they recorded all their findings and even drew the Pokemon in them. I actually feel like maybe weizhe would be especially bad at drawing. So he'll record his stuff, draw his Pokemon, but the worst part about it is that no one can decipher what Pokemon he drew. Only weizhe knows what Pokemon he drew. So yeah, no Pokedexes, but they do have doodledexes. So another thing about these boys is that it feels like when you talk to them, you're talking to someone straight out of a historical drama. They're so polite and their language is so old, but don't be fooled, they are menaces. But you know what, I'll one-up myself. It's not just any historical drama that they came out of. It's a sea drama that they came out of. Because, you know why? These boys are as gorgeous as those sea drama men. Maybe it's good that they're just secluded on the mountain, because once they descend, it's game over. You'll have people questioning their sexuality for them. That's how bad it is. So I think it's a given that they had a very unusual upbringing, which means that they probably had a very unusual, unconventional education. So you know those homeschool kids that are just super smart and just really good at things and you don't understand why? That's exactly longwei and weizhe. They have learned a very particular way of learning Pokemon from their clan. It works really well. It is better than any formal education, but dang, it is rigorous. It is weird. So, for example, in my brain, I'm imagining math class being someone throwing a Pokeball at them and they have to calculate the velocity and the distance in their brain, and then it activating, and then suddenly they have to wrestle a dragon or something. I don't know, something stupid like that. But yeah, so I think because of their unconventional upbringing and education, they are just weirdly good at Pokemon. I imagine when one of them goes to a traditional Pokemon academy and gets formal training, they're just like light years away from the students there. Like, the students don't understand why they're so good at everything. Except for maybe like Poketech or something. Like, that is baffling to them. But I can also see them struggling socially as well, because they're used to only being around people that know the mountain. They don't really know how to interact with other people that are not of the mountain. So even though these brothers had very similar upbringings, they could not be more different. So Longwei, the eldest, is very much like the mountain. He is grounded, he is steady, unwavering, and deeply rooted in tradition. He can be a home to people, but he can also be a terrifying force to contend with. I mean, he's a mountain. Now, weizhe is kind of like the wind, I would say. So weizhe is very free-spirited, clever, always moving. He carries a very sharp wit, often making quick jabs at people, and delivering clever remarks is like second nature to him. He's effortless. His humor also has a lightness to it as well. And on top of that, he is very kind-hearted. But because he is the wind, he doesn't stay around the mountain too long. He goes other places. He feels the need to be in other places. He feels the wind calling in many directions, so to say. So eventually he does leave the mountain, but the wind also returns to the mountain sometimes. Another tidbit about these brothers is that I kind of drew some inspiration, like very loose inspiration, from some Japanese mythology. I compare them to Raijin and Fujin. And a concept that I'm playing around with the mountain is that this mountain, on like the outskirts, before you actually get to the place, is just surrounded by storm. But once you actually get to the mountain, it's really serene. All right, so let's talk about them individually. Let's start with Longwei. So Longwei is the youngest head of the Tenrai clan, and he assumed that role when he turned 17 after the passing of his father. And this was a very important decision for him. It was a very fast decision that he had to make too. So during his teens, he actually went to go challenge the Pokemon League. And he did that for a few reasons. Number one, he wanted to define himself outside of his clan. And by challenging the Pokemon League and getting all 8 badges and the whole shebang, it really instilled that he can stand on his own without his family's name. But I don't think he ever really wanted to become champion or anything. It was just one of those like teenage moments where he's just like, I don't want to do blah 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 and blah 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 because I'm trying to figure out myself, I guess. You know, like one of those things. Not sure. But I can imagine that if at a young age you were just expected to be something without really understanding what that something is, it puts a lot of weight on you, right? You can't really decide whether this is what you want or if this is just what you think you want because that's what other people want you to want. You following? But ultimately, he does choose to be head of his clan. And I imagine weizhe years later asking him if he gave up his dreams of the Pokemon League to become leader. And with certainty, he says no. And you can tell that he has no hesitation, no regrets. It's the straight truth. But he also says, I never dreamed of being the head of Tenrai either. And this is gonna sound corny, but I think his response would be something like, but I dreamed of being the mountain. And I think what that means to Longwei is that there is a duty in being both champion and also being the head of Tenrai. And those duties are very different and they serve different purposes. And I think for Longwei, he doesn't necessarily crave the title of champion, and he doesn't crave the title of being the head of his clan. But what he does crave is what these duties can offer to the people that he loves. And he feels that by being the head of his clan, he can best protect the people that he loves, like his brother. So that is the philosophy of Longwei, if you're following me. He is a very funny person to me because I think between the two of them, he is often seen as the most serious. He doesn't really indulge in playing around as much as weizhe does. He often has a very annoyed look on his face, I think. But he gives off caring big bro vibes. What can I say? I love him. All right, so let's talk about Longwei's Pokemon team. Honestly, kind of ridiculous. Anyway, here's the rundown. Number 1, Garchomp. Number 2, maybe Hydreigon? I'm not sure. Number 3, Como. Number 4, Latios. Number 5, not a dragon type, but might as well be a dragon type, Charizard. And number 6, I think he should have a Rayquaza. Like a mega Rayquaza. You feel me? So let me run down the logic of some of these Pokemon. So I feel like his clan has a relationship with Rayquaza. I think Rayquaza is a guardian of the clan, and every head of the clan gets to basically wield its powers. Maybe after they go through some rites and trying to prove their strength or whatever, you know, something like that. So yeah, he has a mega Rayquaza. His Charizard is also kind of like a guardian, but not to the entire clan, just a guardian to Weizhe and Longwei, because this Charizard was passed down by his parents. And I guess this Charizard is kind of taking the place of their parents in some ways. He's always looking after these boys in some way or form. So I thought it's kind of sweet. And also, I don't know, like, I think it's kind of cool to think about like an old wise dragon just kind of looking after you. I like that image. That's a cool image to me. All right, Latios. So I think Latios represents his relationship with Weizhe, which means that Weizhe probably has a Latias. So what I like about Latios is that Latios seems to reflect his personality a little bit more. Like, do you remember like the movies where Latios was always looking after Latias, that sort of vibe? That's kind of what I think should happen here too. And yes, I know he has 2 legendary Pokemon. I don't know. I think we should give it to him. And I don't know, the rest of the Pokemon haven't really decided if this was the team yet. I just felt like these Pokemon feel kind of aggro. And the way that I imagine his battle strategy to be is to just be like very tanky, like the mountain, you know? Just overwhelm his opponents with pure strength and force. Be grounded in that alone, I guess. I don't know. I mean, if we're talking about pure force, I'm sure the Rayquaza is kind of it, you know? So yeah, that is Longwei. All right, so let's talk about Weizhe, the youngest of the 2. So Weizhe was basically raised and taught by his brother Longwei. And it's important to note that they have a 10-year age gap between them. So when Longwei became the head of Tenrai, he was about 17, which means that Weizhe was about 7. So a really interesting dynamic that they have to navigate is the whole sibling versus surrogate parent relationship. Like, do you remember the movie Lilo and Stitch? If you do you remember Nani and Lilo having to navigate the same thing? Like, Lilo at some point was like, I don't want another parent, I just want a sister or something like that, you know? That sort of vibe, I would say. But ultimately, I think Weizhe really respects Longwei, and he really looks up to him, and he wants to be like him in a lot of ways. But he is like the wind, and Weizhe has always known that he was going to leave the mountain at some point. And I think a lot of people think that he talks in proverbs when he says he just wants to follow the wind. He actually means that quite literally, because ever since he was young, he has always felt a calling, like a literal calling in the wind. And this is connected to your character. So I feel like Weizhe and the protagonist would have a very interesting relationship. Maybe a rivalry in some ways. I'm not sure yet, but he will basically become your best friend. All right, so let's go over how do we meet Weizhe. So after we received the migration research from Ukai, we now know that we have to head to Tenrai Mountain. So we go back into the past timeline. Don't ask me why we go into the past, I haven't fleshed that out yet. But we go back into the past timeline and we head to Tenrai Mountain. And the more we traverse the mountain, we start to hear this voice in the wind. And we don't know what it is, but it feels like it's guiding us somewhere. And it guides us to the protected sacred grounds called the craters beyond time. So we follow the voice and we don't really see anything. And suddenly we hear the voice is right behind us. And we turn around and there is this boy that is looking at us. And we aren't really sure what we're looking at exactly, but he says, the winds change and suddenly you appear. It kind of feels like a chance encounter. It kind of feels like a step towards the inevitable. And for a moment, time seems to hesitate. But the weird thing about him is that it kind of feels like he's not really talking to you either. He suddenly turns around and then his voice gets quiet and thoughtful. And he says, coincidence or something more? And that phrase kind of lingers for a little bit. You want to ask him something, but you get interrupted. Someone is shouting at you and telling you that you shouldn't be here. And when you look, who is it other than a young 10-year-old Longwei who is stopping you? And that's actually when you first meet Longwei. When you try to find the boy again, he's like totally gone. And Longwei doesn't see it. There's no other witness except you. So it feels a little ominous. It feels like he was carried away by the currents of fate itself. So let's actually fast forward to when you visit the mountains in the present timeline. So when you go into the present timeline and you go up the mountain again, you start being led by the wind once more. And you find yourself once again at the crater beyond time. Crater or craters? I don't remember what I said. Anyway, it's like 3 a.m. and I'm talking about Pokemon. Anyway, so you enter into the space again and it feels really familiar. And suddenly you see that mysterious boy again. He's standing at the edge of the crater, eyes distant, and it looks like he's speaking to someone. And he says the same thing. The winds change, and suddenly you appear. And the words drift into the air like an old refrain. And suddenly, he turns around, he turns his head, and he looks at you. He's staring directly at you. Your eyes meet, and he says the same thing. He says, coincidence or something more? You look at him and you're like, this has happened before. And he smiles at you and he says, has it? And you ask him, who are you? And he kind of gives you like a knowing smile. Like, it almost feels like he's kind of teasing you a little bit. Like, well, you're the one that said that this has happened before. He responds and says, you tell me. And that's the first time you meet Weizhe. So, basically, the crater beyond time is a space where time travel or the timelines are a bit thin. So when Weizhe was having that conversation in the present timeline, he probably didn't really understand that he was actually having the same conversation with you in 2 moments of time. So that's what I mean by like, this area is a little bit thin. Does that make sense? So, I don't know. I love this sort of thing because it kind of feels like the both of you are fated in some ways to meet. And Weizhe, I think, has been trying to find you for the longest time, all because of this voice in the wind. And I think that voice in the wind was probably your voice. Oh dang, we gotta talk about Weizhe's Pokemon team. All right. Let's do this quick. So, he has a Hisuian Gudra. I think he has a Dragapult, a Salamence, an Altaria, a Latias, and his signature Pokemon is a Dragonair. And I have decided that he is one of the trainers that never evolves their Dragonair. And the reason that I put down on paper is because he values its elegance, its fluidity, and its symbol to the wind. And also it's a symbol that he doesn't need to change himself to be something else. But really, real ones know, the people that never evolved their Dragonair to Dragonite, those are the people that didn't evolve it out of aesthetics. So that's probably the true reason. So we mentioned Latias because it is the connection and symbol between his brother. The other ones, they just kind of represent the wind in some capacity. Again, still fleshing out this team, but I think that this is a pretty solid team that represents him pretty well. So you can only imagine what his battle strategy is like. I think it's very fluid, and I also feel like there's a playfulness to it. I want it to feel like a dance, like he's dancing around you. Have you ever seen that one episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender where Zuko and Aang find the 2 dragons and they do the dragon dance? That's kind of how I want it to feel when you're battling Weizhe. All right, it is getting late. Thank you so much for watching another Pokemon musing. I hope that you enjoyed some of these characters. I can't wait to flesh them out more. I feel like I've only really touched the surface for a lot of these characters. So to see where they develop and maybe in the game, it's gonna be exciting. I can't wait to see artwork of them. I think that'll be so cool. So yeah, please look forward to more Pokemon musings, more characters, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.